Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. On Sunday, Arsenal's teenagers took centre stage as they dismantled the champions. So can Arteta's Arsenal win anything with kids? All right, here for this one. Having been at the Emirates for the 5-1 demolition of Manchester City, we have the Athletic's Arsenal writer James McNicholas, and also joining us as well, lead writer for the Athletic FC newsletter, Phil Hay as well. James, have to come to you first. 5 goals scored. More importantly, 2 teenagers on the score sheet. Amy Lawrence, in her piece, which is out on The Athletic right now, said, seasons can pivot on moments. Was that moment, Arsenal beating Manchester City 5-1, a pivotal moment for Arsenal's season moving forward?
I don't know. I think they had to do it. That's the thing. Arsenal come into every game at the moment with this huge pressure to not drop a single point. And Liverpool ramped that pressure up again on Saturday with a really good result at Bournemouth. I think all the Arsenal players, the staff, they would have had their eyes on that game as one where Liverpool might drop some points. They don't. They go and win there. So Arsenal come into this game under some scrutiny, knowing that anything less than a win, and probably we're sitting here this morning saying the title's gone, the title's over. So for them to win that resoundingly in those circumstances is really, really impressive. And it was a great occasion at the Emirates Stadium, and the atmosphere was fantastic. Last week we saw Myles Lewis-Skelly sent off. He was subject to the headlines for a whole different reason. I think that is a moment that could be really bonding and pivotal for this squad, because Arteta as a manager, we know what he's like. He'll use that. He'll foster that us against the world mentality. And that Arsenal have gone on to win 2 games since then, one in the Champions League and one in the Premier League, which will be remembered for a very long time.
Yeah, Phil, look, Arsenal kicked off that game 9 points behind Liverpool in the Premier League title race. Liverpool obviously still have a game in hand, which they'll be playing against Everton. How telling was it, the way Arsenal went about that match? Because Amy Lawrence in her match piece also said they played as if they felt they owed City some punishment. There was pent-up emotion from the scars of recent battles, and it all came tumbling out. I mean, very dramatic, but you could see that needle on the field.
That's spot on, I would say. It's a statement win in the context of Arsenal against City. You can feel the shifting sands of what's happening to City and Guardiola at the moment. And I think you could feel yesterday that the shift in the balance of power, in the way that Arsenal are still very much in the title race and City have regressed to the point where they're absolutely out of it now, and no question about that at all. What I don't think it was necessarily a statement win in the context of the Premier League table. And as James kind of alluded to there, that is because of Liverpool. Until Liverpool blink, Arsenal can't afford to drop points anywhere or at any stage. Liverpool still have the game in hand against Everton, so the gap could stretch up to 9 points with games even. And I think if that goes out to 10 or 12 or something like that, it's an awful lot of line to reel in, considering that Arsenal and Liverpool are only going to meet once now before the end of the season, and considering how consistent Liverpool have been. The thing about Liverpool is they do keep passing every single test. I mean, they managed to stall the Bournemouth Express on Saturday, which very few other teams have been able to do recently. James was saying that the staff at Arsenal, players at Arsenal would have looked to that game to have helped them out. I think equally Liverpool would have looked for much more yesterday than City tipping up at the Emirates and capitulating completely. That's the sort of fixture you hope might work for you, even though you're not involved. But City's record against Arsenal has always been very, very strong, and I think there'll be a lot of satisfaction behind the scenes today about how that went and how power does seem to have shifted in that particular rivalry. I've said every time we've spoken about Arsenal, I've kind of said this, and I'll say it again. I don't think they've done a huge amount wrong in the league this season. They haven't been perfect. That's pretty evident. But, they've kind of gone from City piecing together relentless form to win the title to Liverpool now doing exactly the same. And Arteta does need to win a title. His record at Arsenal isn't going to shine without it. But he does have the misfortune of continuing to encounter almost untouchable teams.
Yeah, I wonder, on a personal note, regardless of what happens for Arteta this season and Arsenal this season, James, just mentally beating the master in such a way, and what that does for you, for your career trajectory, and you're thinking, yeah, a lot hasn't gone our way this season, but look what we've just achieved. If we get everything right, gents, this is what we can do.
I think, for him it will mean a lot. It's interesting in the build-up to the game, both Arteta and Pep were asked about the relationship between them as managers, as friends. How has that changed? How has it evolved? They batted it away, as you would expect them to do. But there's no way that it can't be a huge moment for Mikel Arteta to beat his mentor so resoundingly. And I do always feel like in the weeks before these games, you see a different side of Arteta, a different tension in the air around those press conferences. You know, this is the game, I think, probably that above all others, he marks out on that fixture list. So it will have meant a great deal to him. It meant a great deal to the Arsenal fans because, as Phil mentioned, you know, Arsenal have suffered greatly at Man City's hands in recent years. They've beaten them to 2 league titles, which I think in any other season against any other club, Arsenal might well have been champions. But against this extraordinary City side and what they've accomplished in that period, they were pipped to the post. That's been very traumatic for the Arsenal supporters. So I think there was a lot of catharsis in that stadium last night. This is a different City, and I think we need to say that and qualify that. You know, this is not beating the City of a year or 2 years ago. This is a City side with clear weaknesses, without Rodri, that have struggled. But I think on a purely emotional level, for Arteta and the Arsenal fans, this clearly meant a great deal.
Where do you think the relationship's at, James? What's your reading of, you know, the kind of accord between Arteta and Guardiola? Friends, not friends? What do you think?
I think a great deal of mutual respect. I think it's difficult to be friends in the true sense when you are professionally in quite so much competition. And to be fair, I think they've effectively admitted that. You know, they have their own priorities, and so that naturally will take supersedence over a friendship as we might understand it. On a human level, and of course I'm not in that friendship, I don't know, but it must place a strain. I mean, they've been in such direct competition, and there is that dynamic as well of a guy who's been at the very top of the game and someone younger aspiring to sort of push on and, you know, emulate what he's done. There's got to be a bit of tension there. I found it really interesting afterwards, like Mikel Arteta was asked about the meeting between these two teams in September. You know, did you use any of the moments from that game as motivation for your side? I'm thinking of perhaps Erling Haaland telling him after the game, stay humble. And Arteta was like, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. And I thought, I don't believe you for a minute. We've all seen the Amazon documentary. We know what he's like. We know he's got Ivan Toney's tweets on a whiteboard, you know. So I'm sure it's part of it. And all these dynamics, all these interpersonal exchanges and all these things are fantastic, right? I think it always makes me laugh. It's become a cliche, really, when you hear a pundit say, oh, we don't want to see that sort of thing. Of course we do. Like, it's brilliant. And I'm glad that even though City are not in the title race, it seems, this season, I think that City-Arsenal rivalry on the pitch, off the pitch, in the boardroom remains a really heated and captivated one.
Yeah, that rivalry is interesting, and you bring me nicely to my next point, James. And Phil, I want you to jump in on this as well. This whole scenario surrounding Erling Haaland's stay humble comment from the previous match they played. Obviously, Myles Lewis-Skelly scores a brilliant goal, mimics Haaland's celebration, and the club DJ plays Kendrick Lamar's Be Humble right at the end of the game. I mean, I'm up for a bit of rivalry, I'm up for a bit of needle. That's part of the game, and actually I like to see Arsenal players do that. But could you say Arsenal got a little carried away with this one? They've been waiting to press that button, James, you could tell.
Well, listen, I think that's on the DJ. I don't think Stan Kroenke's up there being like, can we get Kendrick lined up for full time?
Next time.
He's doing the Super Bowl. He's doing Super Bowl. He's too busy.
I think you know, we can't put all that on the club. I think the DJ might have got a bit rogue there, but safe to say the Arsenal fans around me certainly enjoyed it. The ones who were young enough to know the track, anyway. Listen, it's great. And the Myles Lewis-Skelly Haaland thing, I mean, there's plenty of history there. Myles Lewis-Skelly made his Premier League debut in the reverse fixture at the Etihad. You may remember it was a debut which he was booked before he even got on the pitch for encouraging, shall we say, David Raya to go down injured while Arsenal were clinging on to a lead in that game. He comes on the pitch, puts himself about a bit, and there was a moment, I think, captured by the cameras where Erling Haaland asked him who he is in less than polite terms. But safe to say, he knows now.
What do you reckon, Phil?
Yeah, I think I was looking at Haaland's dad, Alfie, tweeting afterwards about the fact
he did, yeah.
You know, City have the trophies, Arsenal don't, which is true, but that in itself tells you that what happened yesterday touched the nerve. I think Haaland and Team Haaland could easily rise above it. I mean, he's only 24 and he's won everything of note at club level. His record in the Premier League, goal-scoring record's a complete joke. But Arsenal seem to have managed to get under his skin slightly, and that's probably true of Pep and City in general. I mean, City at the moment they look like they're not a Pep Guardiola team. They look like they're trying to imitate a Pep Guardiola team and doing it really badly. The playing out from the back is atrocious at the moment, and the way in which they're getting cut open in transition and being counter-attacked is really surprising. It's like the loss of Rodri has just ruined everything in a pretty quick period of time. I was saying in the newsletter that they're kind of pressing with the enthusiasm of teenagers getting out of bed, which is not what a Guardiola team does. The only thing with this is that everybody will be keeping receipts. And you can tell that, Gabriel Lewis-Skelly kept them after the game in September. I suspect Arteta probably did too. Haaland and City will keep them after yesterday because if this is another trophyless season for Arsenal, it all starts to look a little bit tin pot, doesn't it? Fair enough, it's heat at the moment, and it was a massive win. And I having been to games like that in the past, I know what the experience is like in the moment when you're there. And it'll be, as I said earlier, it'll be immensely satisfying. But the challenge for Arsenal and the thing that they haven't done to this point is doing it when it matters.
Yeah, and look, in fairness, Haaland did get his goal. Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was a brilliant goal.
It was a brilliant goal. Let's not forget that. But from an Arsenal perspective, James, to see that kind of passion and needle and building up rivalries, it's only great for the Premier League, isn't it? I mean, journalists will dine out on that for as long as it goes. The next match, we'll be looking at it again.
Yeah, I mean, it was great entertainment. Shades of Martin Keown, I suppose.
Exactly.
In Gabriel's reaction to the opening goal. A slightly surreal exchange later in the match where Gabriel appeared to be ordering Haaland to get him his boot.
I saw that.
I mean, look, it's all a bit sort of sideshow stuff, and I'm sure people will roll their eyes at it. I do think if you're a fan of Arsenal or a fan of Man City, you are going to find that incredibly engaging. And just as Phil says, just as Arsenal might have pinned Haaland's comments up on their dressing room wall, well, City have got plenty of ammunition going into the next game. And I think that's what we want to see, these kind of narratives that run across seasons. And I'm excited. I'm excited for the next one. Why would you not be? I think Arsenal and City is a really unique rivalry because you've got the managers, right? You clearly, between the players, there's beef. They've got the managers have got this unusual dynamic where you've got kind of the master and the apprentice looking to usurp the master. And then in the boardroom or in sort of the club philosophies, there is again massive tension. You've got City who, are the sort of state-owned, 115 charges. Arsenal, one of the biggest opponents of City in those big sort of discussions about the Premier League and financial regulation. So it really, at every single level, it works. Phil's right, though. Like, you look at the trophy count, and there's only one winner here. And so Arsenal will be acutely aware of that. And if anything, I think some of what we saw from them on the pitch yesterday, it comes out of the pain that they've suffered at City's hands, because they probably feel like if it weren't for City, we'd have a decent medal collection by this point in time.
Yeah, it has to be said as well, in reverse, that if you go back to the game in September, you had Haaland pinging the ball off the back of Gabriel's head. You had him giving it to Lewis-Skelly
exactly.
and Arteta afterwards. And that was at the end of a game in which City had made a meal of getting a point against a side who'd had 10 players for the whole of the second half. So it's very much quid pro quo. And I'm totally with James here. Some people don't like this beef, but I love it.
Yeah, same. All right. Next, we'll look deeper at Arsenal's teenage stars. Now, joining us to talk about Arsenal's teenage stars, we have the Athletics' Art de Roche joining us as well. Art, good to have you. Now, we've spoken about Lewis-Skelly and Nwaneri's impact on the win against Manchester City. 2 great goals, well taken. But what impact do you think now, considering where this team are and where they have to go for the rest of this season, this sort of youthful energy can have on their progression?
I think it can have a massive impact when you look at what, and I'm sure you guys have already spoken about Saka and Smith Rowe in the kind of Europa League, what they brought to Arsenal. It really can be transformative. But even if you go back a bit further, I saw some Arsenal fans talking about Ramsey and Wilshere a bit earlier on, and I think that kind of spark can be really different to what's already in the team with, I think, Nwaneri. I was lucky enough to be kind of right behind him when he scored, and he was calling for that ball for about 15 seconds. You knew what he wanted to do. He knew what he wanted to do, and he was able to do it. And I think what's really important is there's not too much thought behind what they're doing. you're seeing that they feel that they can affect the game, and they just go and do it rather than being too coached in a way. They just play football, and that's I think the biggest compliment you can pay to them.
I was listening to the latest episode of Handbrake Off, and you were talking about Myles Lewis-Skelly coming into the Manchester City match, and you were wondering whether or not Calafiori would take that. Let's not forget the goal he scored against Manchester City in the last leg of this match. But Arteta went with Lewis-Skelly instead of Calafiori, and that trust definitely paid off.
Definitely. I think when I was kind of having that debate with myself, it was more looking at who do I trust to be more reliable defensively, and that was probably Lewis-Skelly. And we saw way before he scored the way he used his body in defence, how switched on he was. We've seen it throughout the last couple of weeks, months even, and then to do it on that stage and perform the way he did last night, I think you just see someone who's confident in himself and has the confidence of his teammates as well, whether he's on the ball or off it.
Yeah, Phil, has this sort of injuries that Arsenal's have had been a bit of a blessing in disguise, do you reckon, for these young kids to come through? But also, I mean, they come through doesn't necessarily mean they're going to shine.
No, I think you would have to call it a blessing in disguise, because it didn't feel at the time when the injury started to kick in like that was going to do Arsenal any good. And I don't think there was any question that people at Arsenal thought a lot of these two players in particular. It was more the concern would have been how able they were to replace somebody like Bukayo Saka, who is, just they're basically their top player, and someone who, in practice you wouldn't like to be standing in for. I still think in order for Arsenal to have a really big finish to the season, they're going to need a big turn from a fully fit Saka. But I've been really impressed with these two, and I think the bonus for Arteta and what he'll realise now is that as the season goes on and he needs to manage both the Champions League and the Premier League, he'll feel fairly confident that rotating and, using kind of rotation of the squad involving Nwaneri and Lewis-Skelly isn't a horrible risk, isn't a major risk. James and Art will be able to say better than me where these two are going longer term, whether or not these are going to be, big Arsenal players over a decade or that kind of time frame, or whether more like, say, somebody like Nketiah, they'll end up with other Premier League teams perhaps a little further down the chain. But I think the way in which they've coped with recent games, particularly Lewis-Skelly yesterday, tells you that they're assets that Arteta can use now. And he'll be grateful for that, because, you lose somebody like Saka, you need somebody big to step in.
Yeah, for sure. James, I'm going to throw some stats at you. Ethan Nwaneri, 17 years old, 318 days, and Myles Lewis-Skelly, 18 years old and 129 days, became the youngest players to score against the reigning champion since Wayne Rooney netted for Everton against Arsenal in March 2003. Wayne Rooney, of course, was 17 years old and 150 days. Now, the other one which I really like is Nwaneri and Myles Lewis-Skelly scoring against Manchester City was only the fourth time two players aged 18 or younger have scored for the same team in the Premier League, the first since Everton against Fulham in April 2007, and that was James Vaughan and also Victor Anichebe. Old school names, classic Premier League names,
Barclays vintage.
Yeah, but exactly that. But you saw them in pre-season, and they made the team sheet as a season emerged. What were you looking at? What were you seeing while you saw them in pre-season in America? Did you envisage this was where it would go? Because, of course, Mikel Arteta has also been criticised for not using his youth.
I have to say, I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. They were really impressive on the tour, both of them. And I think the club have to be given some credit, not only for holding on to these players. There was a lot of competition for their first professional deal, and Ethan Nwaneri, Chelsea came in from really hard and ultimately committed to Arsenal. They kept Lewis-Skelly as well. That was vital, but they integrated them really effectively this summer, and they were earmarked for positions in the first team squad. Arsenal made decisions like selling Emile Smith-Rowe, loaning out Fabio Vieira, decisions which seemingly left them light, and those were taken partly to afford opportunities to someone like Ethan Nwaneri. Lewis-Skelly, I always thought it would be more difficult almost for him to make that breakthrough, because Arsenal have a ton of left-backs, right? Not only did they spend £42 million on Ricardo Calafiori, they got Kieran Tierney, Alexander Zinchenko, Jakub Kiwior, Jurrien Timber can play there, Takahiro Tomiyasu can play there. In spite of all that, and yes, there have been injuries, for Myles Lewis-Skelly to have worked his way into a position where he's now effectively Arsenal's starting left-back is quite extraordinary. So, huge credit to them. Credit to the manager as well, because I think Mikel Arteta recognised in himself that that was sort of an evolution that he needed to take as a manager. He needed to reach a place of maturity where he felt able to take these risks on these young players, to trust them. And he was quite open about that with us during the summer, saying that, that's a stage I need to reach as a manager. I need to be brave enough, was something he said. And he's got to that place now, and he's been richly rewarded because they've been absolutely fantastic. And at the moment, they're both in a place in their careers where, frankly, they haven't really encountered an obstacle yet. Like, they've taken to the Premier League like ducks to water, and they are absolutely flying. It's incredible to see the amount of confidence and belief that they're playing with. And their progress may not always be linear in that way. There will be challenges. There will be moments they have to overcome. There will be mistakes, and they will present their own difficulties. And, hope if they're good enough, they'll overcome those. But what's incredible, what's a joy to watch, is that they're in that honeymoon period now where they just seem to feel invincible. And it's great to watch.
Yeah, I want to bathe in this positivity in a sec, Art, because, look, I know you wrote a piece on Lewis-Skelly and also Nwaneri, and I love reading the comment section, and it was relatively positive, actually, because it was such a lovely piece. But there's a guy called Rob B said, trophies and playing in the Champions League are all well and good, but they become routine and expectation rather than a delightful surprise because of today's entitled culture. To me, there is just something so much more special and honest about seeing the academy kids rise up through the ranks and not only represent the club, but to perform at the highest possible level. Football clubs are originally about community, and seeing Nwaneri and Lewis-Skelly tearing it up after coming through as school kids just reminds me of that long may it last. Now, there is something really beautiful about this for any team in the Premier League that, amidst the billions, amidst this corporate structures, there is still a beauty to seeing that kid. And it's hard to make it out of an academy, by the way, to make it into first team, because there's also international talent they're recruiting in those spots. Finally make it and actually stand up and play well for their team.
Yeah, I think one other thing that's massive is a lot of the fan base can identify with these players, not just as footballers and how they play, but as people as well. And I think that's one thing that made me so fond of someone like Emile Smith-Rowe, who we mentioned earlier. I could see myself in him. And I think when generations come through, obviously we spoke about Wilshere and Ramsey earlier too. I think you have these players that when they come in so young, you naturally just gravitate towards them. And I think one thing that helped yesterday was the whole stadium wanted Myles and Ethan to score. And when they did, I think that was probably the wildest I'd seen the Emirates for a while. And on James's point on kind of having to overcome obstacles, I think it's weird that we've probably already forgotten that Ethan has had to overcome an obstacle with the injury he had last month. Scored against Brighton, then came off at half-time with a muscular issue, came back and was just as physical, just as kind of imposing as he was before the injury. And I think that's just as impressive as what he's been doing since pre-season, or even when he made his debut 2.5 years ago against Brentford. So, big props to both of them, and big credit to the club as well.
I think as well, we speak about these previous generations, be that Wilshere and Ramsey, or even more recently, Smith-Rowe, Saka, your Eddie Nketiahs, Reece Nelson. They broke through at a time where Arsenal were maybe not the force that they are at this point in time, where they were not necessarily challenging for league titles or, third in the Champions League table as they are at this point in time. For these players to be getting a chance in the first team and seizing that chance in the first team, in the strongest Arsenal team for probably 20 years, I think is a testament to their talent and their mentality.
That comment that you read out as well, Ayo, is bang on the money, actually. It's almost like the one connection now to the community where clubs play. Academy production, particularly of players who grew up in the local area. Obviously, you have a club stadium, but we were writing recently about the Italian Super Cup and the Spanish Super Cup, both of which were played in Saudi Arabia for money, let's be honest. So even that, as time goes on, you suspect will be less and less of a tie. But academy kids from where you come from are as close a tie to local areas you can possibly get.
I think Arsenal are really conscious of that as well. When you look at the stadium artwork around the Emirates, there's one of the panels is just about the academy talent that's come through the club. So Wilshere is on there, Charlie George, I think. I'm trying to remember all the others, but
you opened yourself up for that one. I'm like, who else then? Go on, Art.
It'll be a struggle to do it off the top. But yeah, I think they're very conscious of that. So having these two come through at the same time is massive for them.
Yeah, Phil, back to James's point really as to where Arsenal are right now. You know, Jamie Carragher said on Sky Sports after the game that Arsenal need to win the title this season. Otherwise, it feels like a step back under Mikel Arteta. I thought that was quite an interesting assessment. I guess that says something to where Arsenal are aiming to get to, and also how far Mikel Arteta's come in his tenure as Arsenal manager. But what do you think of that comment?
A step back. Liverpool at the moment are on for 92, 93 points, and teams have gone beyond that total in the past, but it's not a regular thing. You know, that would be a really high finishing spot. So I think you have to be reasonable in acknowledging that the competition out there is extremely fierce this season. I guess it's more the bigger picture stuff with Arteta. He's coming up for 6 years in now in this job, which again you'd have to remember is his first, but that is a long stretch in the Premier League. There's no pretending that he hasn't spent heavily on the squad. He hasn't got a lot of what he's asked for. I think if you put a really good top class number 9 into this squad, it's hard to know what more he could possibly ask for. You know, I think he would have pretty much a full hand with which to play with. And he hasn't delivered a great deal when it comes to trophies. That is a fact. I think he's a slightly lazy stick to beat him with, because Arsenal, to my eyes anyway, are a completely different animal to what they were latterly under Arsene Wenger and also under Unai Emery. But I guess to an extent, it's not entirely flattering when somebody like Arne Slot comes into the Premier League and instantly tears it up in the way that he is at Liverpool. And from Arsenal's perspective, Arteta can't simply keep saying too good about other clubs. Eventually, you have to break somebody's back rather than them breaking yours over and over again. And that, to this point, is the thing that he hasn't been able to do. Whether finishing second this season counts as a backward step, I don't necessarily think it does. But it most certainly doesn't count as a step forward, which is what Arsenal need to take.
Yeah, let's think about the bigger picture, and I think that's really interesting, James. I was with Nigel Winterburn on Friday, and we were talking about he feels slightly disgruntled that Arsenal haven't won a title at the Emirates, the Premier League title that is, and this is a guy who's won 3 league titles with Arsenal, but he said that first one's really hard. Like, once you hit that first one, then you start moving forward. But I'm just thinking more now about this season, and one of the things he was excited about was potentially the Champions League and seeing how far that team can go in the competition. And I guess there's still the Carabao Cup, but if you look at some of the people Arsenal could possibly face in the next round of the Champions League, AC Milan, PSV, Juventus, Feyenoord, that has to be a competition they're earmarking as a relative success for this season if they can keep going on in that competition.
Definitely. I mean, look, the Premier League title is, I think, the big one for Arsenal. I think it's the one that, you know, that feels like everything's been building towards that. But there are other measures of success and progress, and the Champions League could be one. You know, if they can get into a semi-final or a final there, that will feel like a big step forward. And I don't see why they shouldn't, frankly. I think, you know, they've performed really well in the initial league stage. They've got, you know, a bye through to the round of 16 at this point in time. They look like if they get through that, they'll probably have quite a tough draw in the quarterfinals, the way that the table's panned out. But, yeah, I think they'll still have one on that. I think as well, listen, a few weeks ago, I'd written off Arsenal's chances in the Carabao Cup.
Don't say you really think they're going to turn that around at St.
All I'm saying is, Bournemouth went there and beat them. They got beat there again at the weekend. They've just beat City 5-1. That's a big game for Newcastle. And honestly, hand on heart, I think if Arsenal score first at St James's, it'll be a very nervy St James's Park. Listen, Newcastle's still strong favourites, but that's actually why that week was so costly for Arsenal. You know, they had a week where they just were so poor in front of goal, couldn't finish anything, and they lost 2-0 in the Carabao Cup and went out the FA Cup. And that was a big blow, actually, because trophies, yes, the Premier League's the big one, yes, the Champions League the big one, but I think you want to see Arsenal, you want to see a squad of this calibre racking up a few medals, you know, and in a season where it looks very difficult to win the league, those secondary competitions, I think, are important. So that's a big game at St James's on Wednesday. I know it's a very tall task, but I think Arsenal got to give it everything they can. And if they can get one in front there, you never know.
Do you believe in that optimism? This incredible win against Manchester City is enough to galvanise this team to turn over a 2-goal deficit and potentially do really well in the Champions League.
But believe is a strong word.
I'm going up there, so maybe I'm kidding myself, I think. I'm trying to prove it's not a wasted journey.
Yeah, but I think hope would be closer to where I'm at. I think when you look at how the game went yesterday, that early goal was really important, and it's something Arsenal haven't done in a while. I feel in their first title charge, so the 22-23 season, there were a lot of early starts to games in terms of scoring first, scoring early, and if they're able to do that at Newcastle, I think they could maybe get momentum and carry on from where they left off against Manchester City. In terms of the whole Champions League debate, I think one thing that kind of sticks in my mind is the Jose Mourinho football heritage discussion, because Arsenal, just speaking frankly, don't have heritage in the Champions League, really. Got to the quarterfinals last season for the first time in 14 years. And you want to be able to, I guess, not just repeat that, but surpass that year on year. So that's something that I'm looking at in terms of where the development is for the second half of this season. Can you actually push a little bit further? Hopefully, as James said, semi-final or a final. But yeah, that's kind of where my eyes are at, Rob.
You haven't seen the silverware yet,
Exactly. So I'm hoping for a bit more evidence that they can properly push on.
What about you, Phil?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it has to go. I think first goal at St James's might well win. But certainly if Newcastle get it, it looks like tie over at that stroke. Newcastle come into a lot of form recently, and I think they might just have what it takes to get themselves over the line. It's a good lead, home crowd. I think it's in their hands.
All right, let's move on, because next, with transfer deadline day upon us, we'll discuss the impact of Arsenal's kids and what they've had on their outlook in the market this month. All right, well, joining us now on transfer deadline day, we have our football correspondent, David Ornstein, with us. Look, what sort of impact do you think Nwaneri and Lewis-Skelly's two academy prospects breaking through at Arsenal will affect the recruitment process? Because, there's another world where Mikel Arteta can say, look, 5-1 against Manchester City, we scored 5 different scorers. Do we even need a striker?
Well, first of all, Arsenal have been creating a lot of chances in many matches this season, and they've not been scoring them. I think back to 40-odd chances were created, was it, against... I think there was Newcastle in the first leg of the Cup, then Man United. Have I got it wrong?
Yeah, no, that's right.
And then there was one match after that as well that factored into the mix. But it's not been that they don't have the players. They do, but they've not been converting their chances. You think to the Wolves game prior to this one, where there were 3 headers, I think, from Havertz. And so there was always sort of reassuring underlying data, I guess you could say, even if it was more based on what the eye tells you than what the analytics tell you, that suggested that Arsenal were in reasonable shape. No, I'm not disguising the fact that Arsenal would have liked to have recruited if they could, and they've been surveying the market, and they do feel they need something more if they could get to help them through to the end of the season. But they're not going to do that at any expense. And back to your point, they do trust in what they have, their internal resources, and nobody likes to hear that, but they're pretty strong. They've been investing for a long time at Arsenal. They've been building up to the point where they should have a strong squad. And then you look at what's coming through from inside your own system. And in Lewis-Skelly and Nwaneri, these are players that people at Arsenal have known about for a long, long time and had great faith in. But it does take time to mature them and get them ready for this stage and to earn Mikel Arteta's trust. It feels like a different age that Nwaneri came on at Brentford for his debut. And Lewis-Skelly's also been a gradual rise. So that provides them with really timely options. But, it doesn't mitigate the fact that Arsenal have huge challenges ahead if they're going to deliver on the expectations of many. And it was glorious for the club to see the young players performing like that. We've got to be honest, on this show we've been critical and scrutinised Arsenal's development of young players in recent years. You know, when you look at cases of Manchester City, a Chelsea, a Liverpool, even a Tottenham, Arsenal haven't been bringing young players through at the same rate as those clubs or how they used to themselves. And there are questions to be asked about the work going on at Arsenal at academy level and the quality of certain age groups. In terms of coming through, there's Max Dowman. What a prospect he looks. But, you know, I don't think they're too disappointed to see like a Heaven leave, despite how high profile it's been to Man United. Chido Obi-Martin, they would have liked to have kept him, but it's not the end of the world. Because they haven't got the stockpiles of young talent. So this was really sort of vindicating and reassuring that the ones they have backed, they have put their chips down on the table for. Lewis-Skelly and Nwaneri delivered. But, you know, overall, that's a sort of very separate conversation to first team senior recruitment, which they would have liked to have done this month in an ideal world, but it's not always an ideal world. And they will focus and redouble their efforts on what promises to be a really big summer in the market for Arsenal.
That's David's way of saying Arsenal not bringing anyone in in the next day or over this sort of transfer deadline, James. I mean, I always think about, you know, bones of contention against Arsenal and criticisms that Arsenal will always face. Kai Havertz, luckily, you know, redeemed himself in the second half after what looked like a very clear-cut chance, and he's missed a few of those of recent. Not to say he's not an incredible contributor to that team all round. You know, he's assisting and he's scoring in general, but yet again, that will be the question. Why have Arsenal not brought in a forward player or a goal scorer?
Yeah, and they tried, you know. We know that they tried with Ollie Watkins, for example, at Aston Villa. I think Kai Havertz must be one of the most talked about players in the Premier League. And yesterday was a game that showed sort of every facet of him. You know, I thought out of possession he was outstanding, worked so hard coordinating the press, gives Arsenal a physical presence, gives them a focus in their attack. That first half miss was a shocker, let's be honest. He will have known that as well as everybody. I was sort of dreading that could come back to haunt Arsenal later in the game. Fortunately, it doesn't, and he then scores what looks like a much more difficult chance with a really good piece of movement, good run on the outside, and good finish into the far corner. I think, you know, I heard on Sky Gary Neville saying he's having a crisis of confidence. I'm not sure how accurate that is.
I don't think so. The second goal, his goal was well taken, right?
He didn't look like a man lacking confidence. I think that's just who he is. I think he's just a player who has a lot of strengths, a lot of qualities, but is not necessarily a consistent finisher in front of goal. And it is remarkable, isn't it, that, you know, Arsenal have two centre forwards. One is out at the moment in Gabriel Jesus, but if you're listing their many strengths and their weaknesses, you'd say of their two centre forwards, what's their greatest weakness? Finishing, goal scoring. But I think that must tell us a bit about the manager as well and what he demands, what he looks for in a striker. And I think if there are 10 things that Mikel Arteta wants from a centre-forward, Kai Havertz does 9 of them really well. And I think the difficulty Arsenal have is, do you find a player who ticks more boxes? You know, he might not have the clinical finishing that you might look for ideally, but it's hard to find a player out there who they feel can truly offer more. Watkins, I think, would have been a different type, and I think would have been a really good addition. Certainly in the short term.
Did Arsenal try hard enough with him, James? You said they tried, but did they try hard enough?
I think it was always extremely unlikely for Villa to lose both of their centre forwards in the same window, right? In John Duran and Ollie Watkins. I think if they'd maybe pushed for Ollie Watkins harder and earlier in the window, they might have had a chance. By the time Arsenal were talking about the deal, there was always this prospect that Villa could strike a deal with Saudi for John Duran to go. And financially, I think that made more sense to them. Emery, I think, preferred that. So I think maybe if they'd gone sooner and harder, possibly. But they really, while they were active in the market, the intensity of their search for a striker only really picked up in mid-January when Jesus got that cruciate injury. I don't know, David. What do you think?
Were they slightly off the pace, do you think?
In the Watkins case or the whole situation? The
Watkins case and also potentially bringing a forward in, because from the outside it looks like Mikel Arteta's very happy with the team he's got.
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. From the outset, no, they're aware of all options. They've got a really good advanced recruitment department that have done well in recent years, and they've been backed by the ownership. They know the targets out there. They will have been aware of their availability. And the fact is, the one that Mikel Arteta wants the most, Alexander Isak, is going to be extremely expensive, even if he can be prized from Newcastle United at all, which I would say is doubtful. And then you've got players they've done a huge amount of work on, Benjamin Sesko, but he was never going to be a January mover unless something astronomical was to come across Leipzig's in tray, and that didn't happen. Then you start looking down the list to players like Victor Gyökeres, but I don't think he's seen as quite the stylistic fit for Arsenal, whether we agree with that or not. And I don't think Victor Gyökeres is looking at Arsenal as being his next move. So where do you start to go thereafter? A Brian Mbeumo type, but he's more of a wide forward and not available in this market, quite possibly in the summer too. So I didn't sense any consternation in my conversations with people at Arsenal. They know this is more a summer conversation, and they know that they've got players who can achieve for the time being. Back to James's point on Kai Havertz, they absolutely love him internally. Whatever people say on the outside, nobody is seen as getting what Mikel Arteta wants from a tactical, a cohesion, technical perspective more than Kai Havertz. They're absolutely in awe of his intelligence, how well he's regarded by the group, and the qualities he brings. So in response to your sort of wider point, no, I think they were pretty comfortable with that. On Watkins, naturally these things are not easy when it gets to such a late point in the window. Clearly Villa, gave Arsenal the opportunity to do this deal or have a conversation on the basis of a £60 million possibility. That was something that clearly Arsenal were not prepared to do at that value for 29-year-old who, in their eyes is probably worth not quite that much. Again, debatable points, because somebody like Harry Kane was older when he went to Bayern Munich for like €100 million. So they decided to suggest around the £40 million mark. Villa were being serious when they suggested 60, because that's where they value him, and if they need to make the numbers work with PSR and whatever else, and with the Duran situation on the horizon, that wasn't.
They genuinely value Watkins at 60.
Well, I don't know if you think that's too high.
I think it's too low.
Too low? No. So that's what they would have been prepared to have a conversation for. Now that's something that we don't know if it would have led to an offer being accepted, but the door was clearly opened at that level, and Arsenal weren't prepared to go there. Some people I've spoken to said Arsenal should have bit their hands off and gone and done that in a flash. But immediately when you sort of suggest 40, and they've got the Duran possibility on the horizon, Aston Villa pivoted immediately and saw out the Duran situation, and there was no further dialogue, to my knowledge, at least of substance. Now, clearly, for somebody that's gone on record as saying that he's an Arsenal supporter as a boy and it would have been his dream move, etc., perhaps Ollie Watkins would have pushed for it if it came close, but it didn't come close, and there was no sort of attempt by Arsenal to go again or be more concrete, because I think they've got their minds very fixated on the summer, and if this could have been done at a price that they wanted, then you amend those summer plans. But if not, then it's all eyes on the end of the season. Whether Watkins comes into that picture, let's wait and see. But I don't think Arsenal can sort of be really heavily criticised, apart from whether you think they should have given Villa the price that they wanted. But I don't think that guarantees they would have got him. It would have just led to a negotiation. Maybe they still would have gone with the Duran Saudi bid. These situations are never as binary and as black and white and as clear cut as many of us think they should be. And ultimately, I might look stupid with these comments because Arsenal will be judged on the months ahead and it could go wrong. And then everybody will say, you had the opportunity, you could have just put 20 million more down and got Watkins done. There's no guarantee that would have secured Arsenal the trophies and the aims that they wanted. But they'll know that they'll be judged by this. The one thing we do have to keep coming back to is that it's a really tough market. The supply of the strikers is far outweighed by the demand. Manchester United would have loved to have added an attacker. They've not managed to do so. Plenty of other teams. And what do? Just go and waste money on somebody that's not right for you. Equally, many clubs would love to be in Arsenal's position right now. At the top of the Premier League, they'd like to think they're fighting with Liverpool. They're still in the Champions League in a really good position. They might cling on in the League Cup yet. So it could be worse.
The Watkins one's so interesting because, Phil, I take your point. You think 60 million is a good price for Ollie Watkins. But having my ear to the ground, listening to the Arsenal fans, when that story broke, there were plenty of Arsenal fans saying, we can't pay 60 million for a 29-year-old. There's no resale value in that. Is that a good investment? And so there is always this debate around players. I also think I really like Ollie Watkins. I think he's a really good striker, a great goal scorer. Would Mikel Arteta pick him above Kai Havertz? I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Look, it'd be nice to have both, don't get me wrong. But I think what's clear is all this, and Arsenal fans probably won't want to hear it, today or tomorrow in the light of deadline day if Arsenal, as we expect, don't do any business. But it does put huge emphasis and a certain degree of pressure on the summer because you've got this outstanding issue of the centre forward, which will have to be attended to. You've got players like Jorginho and Thomas Partey headed out of contract. We know Arsenal working on a deal, hopefully to sign Martin Zubimendi. That would be a big addition in the midfield. But that centre forward question, it's been hanging over the club really for maybe a year or two now. We've seen centre forwards go in that period. We've seen, the likes of Lacazette leave the club. We've seen Eddie Nketiah, Balogun, Mika Biereth left the club without really pure centre forward coming in. And that will have to be attended to in the summer, surely.
Yeah. All right, let's end it there. David, James, Phil, and also Art de Roche earlier as well. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.